The Very Reverend David Monteith is Dean of Leicester. He is a native of Enniskillen in Northern Ireland, and so a child of the Troubles. Enniskillen is inscribed in our memories because of the Remembrance Day bombing of 1987. That was the climax of a long series of attacks that had begun in 1972. So David's childhood was touched by the use of violence designed to serve political ends. In the midst of this unhappy world, David enjoyed the shelter and nourishment of his family, and it is a particular pleasure to see that his parents have been able to be with us today. David attended Portora Royal School, a state grammar school that was founded by royal charter in 1608 as an avowedly Protestant school. David received an excellent education at Portora, but failed to become avowedly Protestant, certainly not in the tribal sense in which the term is used in Northern Ireland. In 1986, David Monteith left Ulster for Durham University, where he read Zoology, perhaps an unusual choice for one who already sensed a vocation for the priesthood. On graduating, he moved to St. John's College, which is a Church of England theological college in Nottingham, where he took a Bachelor of Theology and an MA in Mission and Ministry. David was ordained as a deacon in 1973 and as a priest the following year. His clerical career began modestly with an assistant curacy in King's Heath, Birmingham. He subsequently moved to St. Martin-in-the-Fields on Trafalgar Square, which, like David, does inclusiveness on a grand scale. At the one extreme, it is the parish church of Buckingham Palace and Downing Street, and at the other end of the social spectrum, it has for almost a century had a pioneering scheme to help the homeless. On the cultural level, it does classical music upstairs and jazz downstairs. Thereafter, David continued his distinctively urban ministry in a series of London posts, and in 2009 he came to another church dedicated to St. Martin of Tours, Leicester Cathedral. He came with a range of interests and passions that clearly reflect his time in urban parishes. Initially, his job here was that of Canon Chancellor, so he was responsible for education and pastoral work. He developed a passion for the city and its diversity, and in due course became chair of the St. Philip Centre for Interfaith Dialogue. In 2013, he became Dean of Leicester. Now, the title Dean of Leicester sounds grand, even presumptuous, as the cathedral is hardly the city. On David's watch, however, the cathedral has in significant part become the focal point of the city. The principal reason for that is the leadership that David showed in presiding over the reburial of Richard III. In some ways, the reburial was a distraction, in that the mission of the church does not extend to promoting dead Plantagenets, but David saw the reburial as an opportunity as well as a responsibility, and he led a deeply complex and demanding process through to a triumphant conclusion. The title Dean of Leicester had become a reality. What sort of man is David Monteith? At a public level, he has the decanal ability to manage large and complex projects. Those who work with him are often struck by his abundant and multifarious talent. Indeed, a visiting bishop recently remarked that David was the most talented priest that he had ever met. David's job is that of dean, and so he deals with the great and good, but he never forgets that his vocation is as a priest, and so he interacts comfortably with ordinary people. Perhaps his most visible characteristic as a priest is his compassion. This is not a virtue that has derived from David's capacious reading, but was rather molded in the crucible of his own experience. He had long worked among the dispossessed, and at the point when he arrived in Leicester, David had just lost his sister Sandra, who had died after 18 years of illness. Suffering can be a deeply destructive force, but in David, the experience of suffering has enabled him to assist others at difficult times. Beyond the dean, and even beyond the priest, there is a man with passions and enthusiasms that include paintings, contemporary poetry, theatre, and gardening. And in a church that still refuses to sanction gay marriage, David lives in civil partnership with his long-term companion, David Hamilton, who is with us today. David Monteith has transformed the cathedral for which he has responsibility. Not only does it have a new internal appearance and a new external setting, but it also houses a king and so has become a magnet for visitors for the city. The work is not yet finished, nor will it ever be. The next stage, which will be overseen by David, is called Leicester Cathedral Revealed. This is a £10 million restoration and development project to be completed by 2019 in order to better serve all of our communities. David's work lies at the heart of the renewal of our city, and in his priestly vocation, he serves everyone who lives in this city. It is an honour to have him among us. Mr. Chancellor, on the recommendation of the Senate and the Council, I present David Robert Malvern Monteith that you may confer upon him the degree of Doctor of Laws.
David, this is a great pleasure. It's so spectacularly well earned. I'm delighted. Somebody take that off you.
Mr. Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, Lord Lieutenant, honoured guests and fellow graduates of the University of Leicester, especially those of you who, unlike me, have worked rather harder to earn your degree. It's a joy for me to receive this honorary doctorate, and I'm deeply grateful to this university. I receive it on behalf of all those who worked with me to make Leicester Cathedral evermore the beating heart of our city and county. The cathedral laments when the world hurts, such as flying the rainbow flag for Orlando. But we also celebrate as the community rejoices. Thus, we lit the building blue and flew the Foxes football flag for a rather significant recent victory. And I counted an enormous privilege in particular to have been so intimately involved with colleagues from the university in the project which searched for and then identified King Richard III, leading on to his reburial in the cathedral with an international audience of millions. All that required interdisciplinary working and cross-organisational working, and we all enjoyed the humour which emerged and kept us sane in the public gaze of those heady days. And some of my favourite tweets at the time include, quote, "No sooner had they removed Richard III from the car park in Leicester than the NCP sent him a fine for £60 for parking more than 2 hours." Or even better for my generation, Leicester, now famous for Richard III's remains, but let us not forget it was the town of 7 previous kings. Shawaddy waddy. You'll need to ask your grandparents about that one. There is nothing new about a partnership between the church and university. In 1927, the Diocese of Leicester was reformed and the medieval parish church of St. Martin was made into the cathedral. That same year, University College was created, which has now become this university. The city character was shaped by the establishment of both of these institutions for the common good. Indeed, our founding figures understood that a healthy city needed academic rigour and deep faith if the promises which seemed to hold were actually to come to fruition. The motto of this university, deeply ingrained, I know, on your hearts, is Ut vitam habeant, that they may have life. This university is a secular institution, yet its motto is a quote from the Bible, from John's Gospel. Jesus came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I hope that as you graduate and that as many of you move on from Leicester, that your memory will be one of life in all its fullness. And I wonder, what might this kind of life in fullness look like for you in the longer term? We're graduating at an extraordinary time in the life of our country. In Shakespeare's Richard III, we find Richard asking Lord Hastings, "What news abroad?" And Richard replies, "No news so bad abroad as this at home." What comes round seems to come round again. We've witnessed huge upheaval, and there is uncertainty, and sadly, there has been conflict. But I hope that you have glimpsed from your time in Leicester a vision of our community where diversity is cherished and where racism and prejudice are not the voices of this community. Life in all its fullness, from my experience, comes from standing and walking together, from reaching out across our differences rather than closing up. My old Pastoral school motto was Omnes Honorati, honour all people, and it stands the test of all time. Secondly and finally, don't forget in your quest for happiness, success or wealth, that life is and can be more than all of that. This city where you have studied is dotted with churches, gurdwaras, temples, mosques and synagogues, and at its heart a cathedral. The stock exchange is never going to capture our hearts, even if it lines our pockets. These other places speak of faith and of other values. And it may not be fashionable at the moment, but a life without an awareness of the spiritual seems to me to be diminished. And we need resources to shape our deepest identity, not least when all of the anchors of life are suddenly taken away by illness, redundancy, war, or political meltdown. A cathedral is a kind of sermon about love in stone, which keeps inviting us into the question, is there an eternal love which shapes us to become more fully human? The playwright Oscar Wilde, who also went to my school, said, "When you really want love, you will find it waiting for you." When you really want love, you will find it waiting for you. So I hope that we continue to find life in all its fullness. As Honorary Doctor of Laws, my life is certainly fuller, and for that I am profoundly grateful. And as our former Prime Minister reminded us yesterday, you are the future. And I hope that part of that future will be to help others enter into this vision of life in all its fullness. Thank you very much.